My honorable and wise Omner, greetings and salutations. I am indebted after these many months for your lengthy epistle. I immediately ceased what I was doing to reflect upon its contents. You are more intrigued by this man Enoch than I expected. I was startled that you assumed the existence of the patriarchal records to which he referred. Have you actually seen them? In any event, he now seems to have turned the more part of the people against him, because of the sting of his sayings. You asked for my assessment of the man. Having now heard him 4 times, I have concluded that he is no fool. His straightforwardness, while it counters so many of the traditions in our time, is refreshing. He denounces the devised murders that some in this city have used to keep their place and power. You know of my contempt for those who must resort to violence when their words fall unpersuasively to the ground. I have been wrong about Enoch in one matter. No one has laid hands upon him yet, and I am not certain that they will now. There was a time when this was possible, and I so told you. He seems too skillful and too well established to be vulnerable to interference with his preachings. While it was earth tremors that first deterred his detractors, now there is a hesitancy among his enemies that seems to be rooted in fear of him. Yet there is a gentleness about him, even a mildness and meekness in his bold denunciations. He truly sees himself as being on an errand for the Lord, whom he call our Savior to come. Yesterday, in one of his sermons, he prophesied the fates of various nations. He omitted no one, and his predictions are dire. The future is dreadful, if we were to believe this stranger in our land. Behold, my servants inform me that Enoch is but a few short rods away from my house. Even now, I go now to gain fresh word for you about this pilgrim. It gives me a special sense of excitement to be able to do so at the very time I am writing you. Some hours have passed, Omner, but more may have transpired than mere the passage of time. I have now heard Enoch discuss what he calls God's plan of salvation for mankind, without which Enoch says we are all lost. It is the most daring and simple explanation of life I have ever heard, though it was consistent with itself. You and I have talked about the philosophies of men many times, observing how the philosophies of men seem to have no fixed reference points. Not so with Enoch. He perceives truth and something called priesthood as coming down to us in a straight line from Adam through patriarchs, some of whom live still. You can see why his views caused a stir here in my city, where so many spend their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing. You know from our sharings in the past that while I have not been religious, I am not one of those who believe that life is explainable without acknowledging the existence of a God. Though I have resisted the efforts of factions to capture God as if he were their own private trophy, Enoch does not give me that tribal feeling. Men seem to me to belong to such factions solely to increase the strength of their own voices, to give them the courage they otherwise lack, or to get gain by multiplying their power. The unselfish, like you, Omner, look outward upon their fellow men with consideration as to how they might serve them, but those in the fellowship of factions are self-serving. Enoch says the forces of evil are led by the father of factions, Satan, who pretends that he is the only begotten of the God the Father. You see how this Enoch is no ordinary itinerant? I must confess I stayed to the end of what he had to say. He seemed to remember me from the time when I first asked him the question. Along with a few others, I also remained afterwards in informal conversation with him. It gave me a chance to ask him several questions without a cacophony of the crowd about us. I wish you could meet this man, Omner. A tent keeper from the hills, who likewise remained after, told me that in his strong desire to hear Enoch, he had hastily told others to keep his tents so that he could come to behold the Seer. Many that hearkened unto Enoch, but the common people seemed to hear him most gladly. He seeks to bring all men to God, saying, He is my God and your God. He not only calls all men his brethren, but actually treats all in that manner. He opens his mouth, and it is filled with warm words of wisdom. Omner, I feel the need of your friendship now more than ever, for there are strange stirrings within me. Perhaps it is more from a mixture of fatigue and excitement than the power of Enoch. You and I have a pact under which we always tell each other the truth. That pact now requires me to say that I can no longer take Enoch lightly. I must hear even more from him in order that I may dispose of this whole matter. His sayings are not incoherent babblings. He is a person of consequence. Though I previously complained of his slowness of speech, I now find the content of what he says so compelling that I scarcely notice his speech. Please do not be alarmed. I am not yet about to yield to his teachings, but neither am I any longer in a position to dismiss his doctrines. There is a boldness about him, and one must dismiss all of them or none of them. Once you accept his assumption, then his logic carries you over a threshold you might prefer not to cross. His assumptions can be rejected, but he has a way of coming back to these principles that is both forceful and exciting. Please be as candid with me, my friend, as I have been with you. I count on your candor as well as your concern. One final observation. In one of your epistles, Omner, you mention your view that as humans, we are individually accountable for the mistakes we make, being slow to lay blame on our ancestors for acts we commit. That is the fearful thing that Enoch says. He views man as knowing sufficiently to distinguish good from evil, and as being truly free to obey or disobey the laws of God. It is a searching approach in an age when so many among us are willing to forget our ancestors in consequence of our concern over our present predicaments. Indeed, Enoch seems at one with his ancestors and speaks warmly and personally of them. Clearly, his heart is much turned to his fathers. What is in the memory and mind truly controls our conduct. To be sure, there are times when men would do evil, but only circumstances prevent it. Recall, Omner, the aging thief we watched years ago in the marketplace trying to steal a nobleman's coin purse. There was larceny in his heart, but his legs were honest, you wittily observed, as the limping thief was overtaken. Your friend, Mahijah.